car that runs on water, a gravity device that makes objects float, a map older than civilization, showing lands no human should have known. These weren't internet rumors. They were real, tested, documented, and then quietly erased. Each case shared a single, chilling pattern. The invention emerged. Governments took notice, and within weeks, sometimes days, it was gone. Files missing, labs dismantled, inventors silenced. No public trial, no peer review, just a blank page where progress should have been. What if the history of technology we know is the censored version? What if the real breakthroughs, free energy, anti-gravity, artificial life, didn't fail? What if they were stolen? And if they were, who took them? And why? What happens when knowledge becomes too dangerous to be allowed? Tonight, we reopen the files that were never meant to resurface, the ones marked classified by sovereign order. Across continents and decades, scientists have pursued one mission: to understand, to explain the forces behind nature, life, energy, and matter. And occasionally, rarely, that understanding pushes too far. This isn't science fiction. It's a pattern. A researcher stumbles on a discovery that doesn't fit accepted models. A new form of propulsion, a biological anomaly, a method of communication beyond current physics. The early data is promising. A few papers circulate. Then suddenly, silence. Grants vanish. Labs close. Experiments are labeled inconclusive or dangerous. But dig deeper, and you'll find the same signatures every time. Military observers present at final tests. Non-disclosure agreements. Patents transferred to shell corporations or quietly expired. And sometimes, people go missing. Not because they failed, but because they found something that could have altered civilization, changed energy systems, erased entire industries. Why would a government suppress invention? The reasons vary. Control of energy, national security, fear of global upheaval. Sometimes even stranger motives are whispered: dimensional instability, non-human origin, collapse of economic order. You won't find these cases in textbooks, but the documents exist. The testimonies were recorded before they were retracted. These 10 stories span continents and ideologies: America, Russia, France, the Ottoman Empire, Cold War labs, colonial maps, pre-digital records erased before digitization. They share no origin, but they all vanish into the same void. This isn't about one government. It's about all of them. A supranational pattern of erasure. A slow, strategic theft of progress. We'll examine machines that ran on nothing, substances that defied gravity, and blueprints that hinted at an intelligence far older than any known culture. And behind every disappearance, one lingering question: was it sabotage or was it success that triggered the shutdown? 10 discoveries, 10 disappearances, all pointing to a singular conclusion. The future we were promised may have already come and gone. Our job now is not to believe. It's to look at what remains in the shadow. To examine what was found, what was taken, and what never returned. The first case begins in Ohio. A man in his garage. A car powered not by oil, not by electricity, but by water. And someone made sure you'd never hear his name. In 1998, in a quiet suburb of Grove City, Ohio, an inventor named Stanley Meyer unveiled a device that, if true, would have rewritten the rules of energy forever. He called it the water fuel cell. It wasn't just a concept. It was installed in a working dune buggy, which he demonstrated for journalists, military officials, and potential investors. The claim was outrageous. His car ran on water, ordinary tap water. Using high-frequency pulsed electrolysis, Myers said he could split water into hydrogen and oxygen using a fraction of the energy normally required. This Brown's gas would then fuel the internal combustion engine. He filed multiple patents, gave interviews, and invited inspection. In one clip, Meyer holds a glass jar filled with water and points to the bubbles rising inside. "You're looking at hydrogen and oxygen being released," he says. Initial tests at the time could not debunk the basic physics. What made his device controversial was not that it split water. It was how little energy it seemed to use. Meyer claimed the process broke the known laws of thermodynamics. That wasn't just revolutionary. It was unacceptable. Shortly after his demonstrations drew media attention, he received visits from 2 Belgian investors. He met them for dinner. During the meal, witnesses say Meyer stood up abruptly, clutching his throat, and ran out into the parking lot. His brother Stephen, who was present, heard his last words. "They poisoned me." Stanley Meyer was pronounced dead at the hospital. Cause of death: cerebral aneurysm. No autopsy was performed. After his death, his lab was broken into. Notes and equipment vanished. Lawsuits invalidated his patents on technicalities. Years later, his remaining documents were auctioned off to private buyers. His water-powered dune buggy? Lost. The U.S. Department of Energy never issued a formal statement. But documents surfaced later showing defense contractors had made confidential inquiries into Meyer's work months before his death. Some dismissed him as a fraud. Others pointed to the strange consistency of his story, the multiple patent filings, and the eyewitnesses who drove his car. What's not in dispute is this: the technology never resurfaced, and oil remained king. Was Meyer a con man, a visionary, or something else entirely? We may never know. But one detail lingers. Among his recovered documents was a typed letter, unsigned, undated, mentioning interest from a Defense Energy Task Group. That group no longer exists. Or perhaps it never did. And this wasn't the last time a discovery involving field-based propulsion and suppressed energy vanished under strange conditions. In the early 1990s, inside a sealed laboratory at the Moscow Chemical Scientific Research Center, a Russian physicist named Eugene Podkletnov ran a series of unauthorized tests on a spinning ceramic disc. It was designed for superconductivity research. But what he found was anything but conventional. Objects placed above the disk, while it spun within a controlled magnetic field, lost up to 2% of their weight. Not once, not randomly, but repeatedly. He measured it, controlled for variables, repeated it again. The gravitational field above the disk was measurably weaker. Podkletnov had stumbled upon something unheard of: gravity altered by a machine. In 1992, he co-authored a brief paper quietly titled "Gravitational Force Shielding by Superconductors." It was published in Physica C, a peer-reviewed physics journal. At first, it went largely unnoticed, but within 6 months, the paper circulated to defense circles. That's when the suppression began. Podkletnov was scheduled to give a full technical lecture at Tampere University in Finland. Days before the event, the university canceled it. His research facility was raided, officially for unauthorized experimentation. His access was revoked. He retracted his own paper under pressure, citing premature publication. Privately, he said he was told his work had strategic implications. Around the same time, documents leaked showing NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center had begun theoretical replication studies of Podkletnov's configuration. The results remain classified. A 1997 memo from the Black Vault archive, before it was purged, references G-Shield Phase 2 testing. That memo no longer appears in public DoD repositories. Podkletnov's name vanished from mainstream physics. He resurfaced briefly in 2001, claiming he was working with an unnamed European aerospace firm. But no follow-up reports were ever confirmed. To this day, no independent lab has been granted funding to replicate the gravitational shielding experiment at full scale. The official position remains silence. Why would a government suppress a technology that could reduce gravity? The implications are vast. Propulsion systems without fuel, structures immune to seismic waves, or even weapons that alter gravitational fields. Yet gravity remains one of physics' least understood forces, and any hint of its manipulation vanishes into classified channels. Some dismiss Podkletnov's claims as flawed science. But his original data was never disproven, only withdrawn. And buried in the same Finnish archive where his early experiments were stored, a file folder remains miscatalogued. The label reads, Podkletnov, V2, CERN Contact, 1996. No CERN correspondence on gravitational shielding has ever been released. But the thread continues, across borders and decades. And it stretches back even further, to one name, Tesla. In 1901, Nikola Tesla stood on the cliffs of Shoreham, New York, gazing at a tower he believed would change the world. It was called Wardenclyffe. Officially, it was a wireless telegraphy project. Unofficially, it was a planetary energy system. Tesla wasn't trying to send messages, he was trying to send power through the Earth itself. Wardenclyffe Tower rose 187 feet into the sky, with an underground structure extending nearly 300 feet below. Tesla claimed it could transmit electrical energy wirelessly, using resonant frequencies in the Earth's crust. The result? No wires, no batteries, energy anywhere, for anyone. He called it the universal power system, and he meant it. Free, global energy. The tower was partially funded by industrialist J.P. Morgan, who initially supported Tesla's promise to rival Marconi's wireless communication. But when Morgan learned Tesla's true goal, unmetered global power, he pulled all funding. The quote attributed to Morgan is simple and damning. Where do we put the meter? Without financing, construction halted. Tesla's reputation began to erode. Newspapers once loyal turned skeptical. Wardenclyffe was abandoned by 1906. Then came the erasure. In 1917, under the pretext of wartime security, the U.S. government ordered the tower demolished. Tesla's remaining equipment was confiscated. His notes? Seized by the Office of Alien Property upon his death in 1943. Despite being a U.S. citizen, Tesla's documents were never returned to public record. Among those documents was a schematic labeled Magnifying Transmitter Array, Global Model, never published in his lifetime. To this day, only fragments of it exist. Some believe Tesla had already succeeded. A small Colorado Springs experiment in 1899 lit bulbs 25 miles away, without wires. Observers claimed to hear the hum of buried current. In 1976, declassified Soviet records revealed their own interest in ground resonance energy transmission, citing Tesla by name. Why suppress it? A global power system with no centralized control would collapse monopolies. Oil, coal, utility grids, a threat not just to markets, but to nations. Today, Tesla is celebrated. Statues, cars, museum exhibits. But the one invention he claimed would give power to all? Erased. Not by time, by design. Only one image of the original tower interior survives. It shows a steel coil, 10 feet high, ringed by copper cables. Handwritten on the back, "For Earth, not for sale." And this wouldn't be the last time a map of invisible forces would threaten accepted power. If these first three were coincidences, Story 4 will test that theory. A map older than empires. A coastline that should be frozen. A document that rewrites history and then disappears. In 1929, as the Ottoman Empire dissolved, a bundle of old scrolls was discovered inside Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. Among them was a parchment map drawn by Admiral Piri Reis, an Ottoman naval officer and cartographer. The map was dated 1513. At first glance, it appeared to be a standard nautical chart of the Atlantic. But closer analysis revealed something staggering. It showed the coastline of Antarctica without ice. Modern Antarctica is buried beneath 2 miles of frozen mass. Its true geological contours weren't mapped until 1958, during the International Geophysical Year, using seismic data. But the Piri Reis map depicted them over 400 years earlier. With stunning accuracy, Reis himself noted that he had compiled the map using 20 older charts, some from the time of Alexander the Great. He claimed to have used ancient sources, now lost. In 1960, U.S. Air Force cartographers confirmed that the southern continent on the map closely matched the subglacial coastline of Queen Maud Land, uncovered by sonar decades later. Charles Hapgood, a Harvard-trained historian, proposed a radical theory. The map was based on knowledge from a pre-glacial civilization, one that mapped the Earth before Antarctica froze. That's when the pattern began. Hapgood's books were quietly removed from university libraries. His correspondence with the U.S. Navy regarding the accuracy of the map disappeared from archival repositories by the early 1970s. In 1993, a researcher submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the Defense Intelligence Agency, seeking documents related to the Piri Reis analysis. The response was peculiar. No documents found. The letter was marked with an internal routing code, SVL-7, used only for geospatial intelligence classification. Why would a 16th century map be classified? Because it didn't just depict Antarctica. It showed inland rivers beneath the ice, data that modern LiDAR only confirmed in the 21st century. And buried in the margin, written in Ottoman Turkish, one phrase remains untranslated by official Turkish historians. Private linguists read it as land known before the shift. What shift? Hapgood theorized a rapid crustal displacement, an entire movement of Earth's outer shell around 10,000 BC. This would place the source of the map before the last ice age. The academic community dismissed it as impossible. But geologists found traces of tropical flora beneath Antarctic ice cores. And in 2002, NASA's GRACE satellites confirmed that Antarctica's ice sheet was thinner in precisely the region the Piri Reis map depicted. If true, the implications are vast. A seafaring civilization, global in scope, erased by planetary catastrophe. But perhaps more threatening was the conclusion that followed. History is not linear. And our timeline may have been edited, a notion far more dangerous than any machine or fuel. Yet even this was only the beginning, because a sound, barely audible, once shook concrete and governments. In the mid-1960s, deep inside a concrete military lab in Marseille, French researcher Vladimir Gavreau noticed something strange. Technicians working in the building frequently reported headaches, nausea, even blurred vision. Yet no chemical agent could be found. Gavreau began testing the environment. What he discovered wasn't poison, it was sound. Low-frequency vibrations, oscillating between 7 and 19 Hz, were pulsing through the building, far below the threshold of human hearing. It wasn't malfunction, it was resonance. Gavreau built a series of experimental devices designed to replicate the frequencies, using large air columns and oscillators. When tested at low power, the sound produced queasiness. At higher power, it triggered temporary paralysis. But one test changed everything. Using a focused infrasonic emitter, the team observed a strange phenomenon. Metal bolts began to loosen. A rubber seal ruptured. And in one chilling report, a slab of animal tissue liquefied within seconds. They had discovered acoustic resonance weaponry, sound used not to communicate, but to destroy. Military interest surged. French defense officials ordered a secure facility built for further testing. That facility was shut down within a year. Official reason? Equipment failure. Unofficially, 3 technicians suffered internal hemorrhaging during a high-powered test. No autopsy was ever released. The files vanished. Gavreau ceased all public research. In 1974, U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, filed a confidential report labeled Project Silent Field. It described non-lethal deterrence through infrasonic emission. The frequencies matched those from Gavreau's earlier work. That document remained classified until 2018. When it was released, key sections, power levels, test sites, long-term effects were fully redacted. Some argue Gavreau's experiments were misinterpreted. That standing waves in poorly ventilated spaces can cause psychosomatic responses. But internal DARPA memos suggest otherwise. Sustained exposure induces somatic breakdown at cellular cohesion thresholds. Further weaponization not recommended outside of controlled theaters. Which raises a question. If such weapons existed, why were they never deployed? Or were they? In 2016, U.S. diplomats stationed in Cuba reported unexplained headaches, memory loss, and balance disorders. The phenomenon was dubbed the Havana syndrome. No chemical cause was found, but one theory suggested focused ultrasonic or infrasonic weapons. The U.S. government has neither confirmed nor denied the possibility. And Gavreau? He disappeared from the scientific community. No interviews, no memoirs. Only one surviving letter to a colleague ends cryptically. It was not sound. It was structure. What did he mean? Did he unlock a principle beyond weaponry, one tied to matter itself? Another French researcher, decades later, would try to answer that, but his work would be buried even deeper. Because his subject wasn't sound, it was hybrid life. In the spring of 1926, Russian biologist Ilya Ivanov stood in a jungle clearing in French Guinea, surrounded by cages. Inside, female chimpanzees, carefully selected and transported for one purpose. Ivanov intended to inseminate them with human sperm. It wasn't a rogue experiment. Ivanov's mission had been authorized at the highest levels of Soviet science. His goal? Create a human-ape hybrid, a new species, stronger than man, more obedient, less prone to rebellion. The project, known internally as Anthropoid Initiative 4, received funding from the Soviet Academy of Sciences and quiet approval from certain political figures, including elements within Stalin's inner circle. Ivanov had already successfully created hybrids between horses and zebras, mice and rats. He believed interspecies fertilization, under the right hormonal conditions, could work in primates. Over several months, Ivanov attempted multiple inseminations. None resulted in pregnancy, but the work continued. In 1929, documents show Ivanov was transferred to the Sukhumi Primate Center in Abkhazia. There he reversed the experiment, planning to inseminate human women with chimpanzee sperm. Volunteers were allegedly recruited under the premise of biomedical advancement. That part of the program never began. Days before the first procedure, Ivanov was arrested. No trial, no public charges, just a silent removal. He was exiled to Kazakhstan and died 2 years later. Officially, the Soviet government claimed the project was unethical pseudoscience. But internal records, declassified in 1996, tell a different story. The experiments were halted not because they failed, but because they succeeded too far. One entry, redacted except for a single line, reads, "Cognitive response exceeded chimpanzee baseline by 39%, terminated at 8 weeks." To this day, the fate of the test subjects is unknown. Western intelligence agencies were aware. A 1932 MI6 briefing references Soviet chimeric life forms and aborted anthropoid protocol. The files were marked not to be circulated outside biological command. Some claim Ivanov's work was echoed decades later by other programs, allegedly in China and in South Africa, under the guise of apartheid-era eugenics. Critics dismiss the entire story as Soviet-era myth, conflating limited cross-species experimentation with science fiction. Yet one undeniable fact remains. In 1997, a team mapping the human genome found 223 genes with no known evolutionary precursor in any other species. The discovery was quietly retracted, rebranded as a computational artifact. But what if it wasn't an error? What if the boundary between human and non-human was crossed, not once, but many times, and buried each time under the weight of political fear? Whatever the answer, Ivanov's shadow never faded. One of his assistants later wrote in a private journal, "He was not trying to build a soldier. He was trying to wake something older than us." From here, the files begin to change. Less ink, more redactions, fewer witnesses. From here on, the pattern stops asking for permission. And the next story takes us to Montauk, to a facility with no front door, and a device that tore a hole in time. In the early 1980s, a man named Alfred Bielek began speaking at underground science conferences in New Jersey and Arizona. He wasn't selling books or theories. He was making a claim that in 1970, he had stepped inside a government-built machine and vanished. Not in death, in space, and possibly in time. He called it Project Pegasus, a black-budget research initiative operating under the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. Its goal, according to Bielek, was experimental teleportation and chronal manipulation using scalar field arrays, electromagnetic patterns designed to bend local space. The primary test site? An unregistered military facility in Montauk, Long Island. Bielek described a device involving magnetic coils, rotating plasma rings, and a central chair, allegedly reverse-engineered from recovered foreign technology. Participants were trained to withstand physical dislocation, mental distortion, and temporal instability. He claimed children were used because their electromagnetic fields were more malleable. In one experiment, he was allegedly sent forward to the year 2137, where the United States no longer existed. He said he witnessed data scrolls floating in the air, human consciousness merged with AI, and a quiet sky full of silent machines. Wild stories, easily dismissed, until documents surfaced. In 1993, researcher Preston Nichols published fragments of logs retrieved from what he claimed were discarded terminal servers at the now demolished Montauk Air Force Station. Among the files, MTK PG 1973-041. Telemetry from Chair 2, subject reports temporal drift, Jupiter visible. MTK PG 1974-077. Protocol suspended. Event horizon instability exceeds 20 securn. DARPA denied ever running a program called Pegasus. Yet, internal DARPA budget sheets from 1971 list an unexplained $4.2 million dispersed to a line item labeled TPT-PRG Phase B. Later, FOIA requests returned blank pages that matched the exact formatting of known DARPA grant documents. One former technician, who requested anonymity, claimed he was assigned to Pegasus as a junior electrician. He remembered seeing coils, radiation signage, and armed guards. When asked about Bielek, he said, he shouldn't remember any of it. That was the point of the drugs. Skeptics point to the lack of hard evidence. But the pattern remains. A program no one will acknowledge. A facility erased from maps. Logs removed from federal repositories. And then, one connection buried in metadata. In a 1997 Air Force document known only as the Black Vault Memo, a footnote refers to temporal artifacts retrieved at MTK. That memo was purged within 72 hours. But we found it, and it leads directly to the next case. A document that not only survived, but should not exist. It describes gravity defiance, mass cancellation, and disappearance. A document that returned us to the ruins of Podkletnov's lab, where someone, or something, had come back. In May 1997, a TIFF image file surfaced on an encrypted Usenet channel used by amateur archivists and digital freedom activists. Its file name, AFIMTRX VLT Doc 4 XUM TIFF. It appeared to be an internal memo from the U.S. Air Force Materiel Command. Stamped for internal use only, its subject line read, Recovery of non-local propulsion artifacts. Classification directive pending. The body of the memo referenced an incident site in Finland, listed only as Zone 7 Novikov object. It described retrieval operations from destroyed superconductive testbeds and the transport of residual core fragments exhibiting anomalous mass effects. The details were chilling. Witness reports of spontaneous object levitation, electromagnetic pulse distortions, and field collapse. The language mirrored known parameters from Podkletnov's gravity shielding disk. But this time there was no academic name, no paper, no peer review, just wreckage. The memo claimed the fragments were relocated to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, specifically to Hangar 23B, under the authority of a previously unknown unit. AFSABT-9, the Temporal Vector Studies Group. Within 72 hours, the file vanished from Usenet indexes. Attempted downloads began returning corrupted data. Multiple independent hosts were taken offline. The original poster never surfaced again. But while one user, an anonymous handler known only as IDZ5, managed to replicate the file's checksum and confirm metadata linking the memo to a now-defunct military printer manufacturer used at DoD sites in 1997. The document was real. It mentioned two names, TPT Array Control, Montauk, and G-Field Vector Set, Podkletnov Pattern C, which meant two of the most disputed stories, Project Pegasus and Podkletnov's gravity work, had been combined in a single, classified reference. One line stood out, redacted except for a chilling phrase, Artifact 3 disassociated, tracers initiated, personnel K-level clearance required. What was Artifact 3? Where did it go? Or more accurately, when? After the leak, Podkletnov resurfaced briefly in a Finnish interview. He denied involvement. But when pressed on whether gravitational shielding had ever produced spatial anomalies, he paused, then said, It created a problem we could not name, so we stopped. 1 week later, the website hosting the interview went offline. Permanently. Wright-Patterson, AFB, has long been rumored to house exotic material, dating back to Roswell. But never before had a temporal connection been suggested. Until this memo. Skeptics call it digital fabrication. But forensic analysts found no signs of manipulation, only embedded document stamps consistent with 1990s-era DoD standards. So what happened at Zone 7? Who, or what, triggered the collapse? The only clue comes from an attached map, retrieved from the same archive hours before the server purge. It marks the region north of Tampere with a hand-drawn symbol beside it. A 6-winged insect, the same one sketched decades earlier by a man named Grebennikov. And what he found in Siberia still defies known physics. In the mid-1980s, Soviet entomologist Viktor Grebennikov made a quiet claim that, if true, redefines everything we know about natural physics. In a typed manuscript circulated among a few colleagues, he described discovering an anti-gravity effect, not in a laboratory, but in the exoskeleton of insects. Specifically, the hardened wings of Siberian beetles. Grebennikov noted that certain microstructures in the chitin shells, when arranged in specific hexagonal arrays, exhibited unusual field behavior. When stacked in precise configurations, the air above the material felt electrically charged. Objects placed near it trembled. Compasses spun. So he built something. Using laminated panels of these insect shells, Grebennikov claimed he assembled a platform, roughly the size of a manhole cover, attached to simple handles. He wrote that upon activating the structure, it levitated silently. He said it flew. And in his journals, he described a field effect, a perceptual distortion, a blurring of time, where environments shifted without physical movement. Was it hallucination? Myth? In 1993, Grebennikov published fragments of his story in a Russian-language book titled My World. It contained diagrams of his platform and blurry photographs of the skies above Novosibirsk, taken during alleged flight. The images showed faint shadows with no visible craft. What happened next was silence. In 1995, Grebennikov was scheduled to present his findings at a TED-style scientific event in Novosibirsk. He never arrived. Local records indicate he boarded a train from Bertsk. But no trace of his disembarkation exists. His home was found undisturbed. His research materials, gone. Russian officials declared him voluntarily missing. But in 2008, a U.S. researcher visiting Novosibirsk State University discovered an unlabeled envelope buried inside a misfiled biology cabinet. Inside were 6 pages, sketches, field readings, and a note scribbled in broken English. They found me. The field opens more than space. My last flight. Goodbye. Included was a symbol, 6 wings in a spiral pattern, the same as the one drawn on the recovered Black Vault memo map. Entomologists later confirmed the shell configuration Grebennikov described could generate piezoelectric effects, small electrical fields under pressure. But not enough, they say, to cause levitation. Yet no one has ever attempted to replicate his design at full scale. No university has requested access to his preserved samples. Most were lost, destroyed, or reclassified during the 1990s transition. Today, his story is considered fringe mythology, and yet it connects to the same classified corridors: Podkletnov, Pegasus, Zone 7. In one late interview, a retired Soviet scientist claimed he once saw Grebennikov's platform locked in a glass case at a restricted military facility. When asked where, he simply said, "Where you keep what breaks the laws of nature." And now, the final story returns us not to machines, but to ourselves. To something found in our DNA, then erased. A discovery that may confirm all the rest, or end them forever. In 2003, as the Human Genome Project neared completion, a research team led by Dr. András Pelionis quietly submitted an anomaly report. Amid the mapped human DNA, they identified a set of 223 genes, sequences not found in any other known life form. Not in chimpanzees, not in bacteria, not in any evolutionary precursor. These genes did not mutate from prior structures. They appeared to have arrived, intact, functional, and unaccounted for. One internal summary, later leaked, referred to the discovery as the third line. Line 1, natural evolution. Line 2, artificial modification. Line 3, the unexplained. Initial media coverage was brief. Headlines asked if humans had alien genes. But within days, institutions pulled back. The NIH scrubbed the anomaly from its public database. The research team received a notice. Reclassify the sequences as spontaneous transfer or face grant suspensions. But the math didn't lie. Lateral gene transfer, common in bacteria, cannot explain a bulk transfer of 223 fully intact, functional genes into complex primate DNA. Especially not genes related to neurological structure and immune system control. One of the suppressed papers suggested the genes acted as switches, modular sequences that activate only under extreme environmental or psychological conditions. A hypothesis arose. What if these weren't accidents of nature, but implants? Dr. Pelionis never published again. His lab was folded into a private bioinformatics firm under undisclosed acquisition. His domain went offline in 2005. Then, in 2011, an internal audit at a European genomic database uncovered a restricted folder. The label, MT Carrion, Non-Human Inserts, Origin Dispute. It contained cross-referenced sequences, including the same 223 gene structure, tied to classified health studies among remote populations in Siberia and northern Alaska. Among the notes was a single red ink phrase, subject class Grebennikov type. The implications rippled backward, to Grebennikov's insect levitation, to the Podkletnov anomaly, to the energy systems Tesla hinted at. Resonance fields tuned not just to matter, but to biology. Was it possible the technologies suppressed across the past century weren't independent, but linked by a layer of design embedded not in our machines, but in ourselves? Some dismiss the gene cluster as contamination. Others say the insertions were viral. But no virus carries full regulatory code. No evolutionary tree explains a self-contained package of dormant power. If it was natural, it would appear in cousins. If it was a lab error, it wouldn't survive peer review. But it did, until it was buried. Whatever the third line was, it was not meant to be found. And perhaps that's the real secret behind all 10 stories. Each discovery didn't just break a rule, it triggered a response. Not just from governments, but from a system larger than any single country. One that deletes, reclaims, or erases what we were never meant to keep. Because the question was never, what did we lose? The question is, what were we getting close to unlocking? If even one of these stories holds truth, then history isn't simply a path of progress. It's a sequence of sealed doors. Some we walked through, others were bolted shut. We think of lost discoveries as accidents, unfunded, forgotten. But 10 unrelated breakthroughs in 10 different fields across 10 decades. Each vanished under the same conditions. Sudden disappearance, confiscation, silence. What connects a fuelless engine, a gravity shield, a pre-ice age map, and a genetic anomaly? They all suggest a force we are not supposed to understand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The skeptic will say this is selection bias. That in the vast chaos of science, some stories end in failure, others in fantasy. That coincidence isn't conspiracy. And maybe they're right. But what if these are not coincidences? What if they're warnings? Echoes of a frontier we keep approaching and keep being turned away from. Because a civilization based on extraction cannot allow the idea of free energy. Because a world built on hierarchy cannot tolerate non-human origins. Because a species taught to obey gravity would collapse if we discovered how to leave it. So these discoveries were not disproven. They were confiscated, not erased from history, retracted from reality. And if that's true, then the next breakthrough may already exist. Right now. In a locked room, in a forgotten lab, or inside someone who's beginning to ask the wrong questions. You don't have to believe any of it. You just have to notice how often the impossible disappears. What do you think gets erased faster? Bad science or dangerous truth?